In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to put together the best 1440p gaming PC build you can put together right now. With some awesome components, a white colour scheme, and a budget that frankly doesn't break the bank, you can't go too far wrong. I'll be walking and talking through all the parts, how to put it together, and the performance a little bit later on. So without any further ado, let's do this. Let's kick things off by taking a look at our CPU and GPU combo straight off the bat. The processor is Intel's Core i5-12600K. Now this is basically the best mid-range gaming processor on the market. That is probably going to change with AMD's newly announced Ryzen 5 7600X, but for now this thing takes the cake in terms of single-threaded and multi-threaded performance. Even if these new AMD chips are as good as we think for multi-core, single-core is still as of yet undetermined, and that's the metric that makes the most difference in games. With Intel's latest performance and efficiency cores and a K designation, that means it's unlocked and can be overclocked, baby, this thing is going to work really well for the system. It's going to pair up beautifully with our RTX 3060 Ti, a GPU that we've been known to rave about. It's a card that punches well above its weight class, in my eyes being a better buy than a 3070, with very close performance levels but a much cheaper price point and an awesome aesthetic. What's more, you can also pick this up for a great price right now. RTX 3000 deals are literally crazy. With 4000 on the horizon, cards like this, which we're not actually expecting to be replaced anyway in around October time, that's at least the rumours for now, this thing is an awesome buy and isn't likely to go out of date anytime soon either. When it comes to gaming performance, the 3060 Ti is at home at 1440p. Add in a little bit of spice, or DLSS as I call it, to these games for a little bit more oomph, and you're sure to be achieving more than 100 FPS in most titles. We'll be looking at gaming benchmarks in more detail later, so don't go anywhere, and make sure to get subscribed to see all of the other content that we've been doing with this card and many others. Now, of course, because we've gone for an Intel platform in this build, we do of course need an Intel motherboard to install it in. And that's where the MSI MAG B660M Mortal Wi-Fi comes into its own. Now, this board has a few key features which make it an awesome bet for a build like this one. Not only, of course, does it have that LGA 1700 socket that we need for all the 12th gen processors, but it also supports DDR4 memory. I can't get this box closed. There we go. But it also supports DDR4 rather than the more expensive DDR5 memory. Good for a more budget-oriented build like this one. It's got 4 RAM DIMM slots for dual channel memory. And if we spin round to the rear I/O, we've got 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, Wi-Fi 6E, and plenty of high-speed USB 3 and C ports for good measure. Basically, it ticks all the boxes. PCIe Gen 4 as well. The list just keeps going on and on and on. Plus, the silver heatsink should actually give us a nice light edge and help to fit with our more white colour scheme in this system. One thing I'd love to know the answer to is how on earth is this CPU box brand new? It's completely sealed on both sides. What have the UK Postal Service done with our processor? It's like someone's gone ahead and drop kicked it, sent it flying a million miles, and then landed it back to Earth. That is bonkers. Also, the CPU is like, listen, it's not even secure in there. This is a brand new processor. It's factory sealed. I should probably stop doing that now. On the corner of the processor, you should notice this little golden triangle right here. We're going to match this up with the bottom left-hand corner of our CPU socket. If you lift up the retention arm on the processor socket itself, we can then drop the CPU in. At this stage of proceedings, we're then going to go ahead and add in our RAM or memory. A simple 16 gig kit of Corsair Vengeance RGB is going to do the trick nicely. This kit is white as well, or at least it has a little bit of white accenting on the heat spreader, which looks amazing. Corsair really know how to make a good kit of memory, and this particular set is no exception. Pull back the clips on the 2nd and 4th RAM DIMM slots, slide your memory in the right way round, in our case with the Vengeance logo pointing away from the CPU, apply a bit of pressure to both sides, and the RAM should click in nice and easily. You'll get a satisfying click sound whenever it goes in, and that's how you know your memory's been installed. To round off the work on our motherboard, before we start getting our case involved, a component I'm particularly excited for in this build, we can add in our storage. In this case, Samsung's SSD 980. Now this is a 500GB drive, which will be enough for our most popular games, our Windows boot and that kind of thing. If you're particularly space hungry, a 2TB hard drive as an addition to this build is a good shout, or maybe even just a larger SSD if you've got the cash. I'll be installing the SSD into the M.2 slot just here on the motherboard. What you need to do is grab yourself a really small screwdriver like this one, often referred to here on the channel as a teeny tiny screwdriver. And once your hand stops shaking, actually go ahead and unscrew the retention screw on our motherboard standoff. There we go. The drive is then going to slide into the slot. You've got to do it at sort of a 45-degree angle. You can't just pop it in flat straight away. Once it's caught, it will hold on like so. It's a bit bouncy, and you can actually push it down and secure it into place. Add the screw back in, and your drive's not going to go anywhere. If you don't like this drive or want to weigh up the different options, we have compiled a list of our favourite Gen 3 NVMe's and Gen 4s, actually, for that matter, which we'll link in the cards now or down in the description below. With all of this in the bag, I think we're pretty much done and ready to look at the case, although there is one optional step you can do now to make your life a bit easier later. That actually involves picking out your CPU cooler. In this build, a brand new unit, the MSI Core Liquid 240R V2. Now, I've dealt with this cooler before, been pretty impressed with it, but this particular version is actually white, or like a light grey. I think it's meant to be white. If you've got your finger on the pulse with the PC industry, you'll see that white components are a trend that have only grown over the last couple of years. And personally, I think white components are awesome. They add a nice little addition to any build. They let you do something just that little bit different. And if done properly, they can look seriously good. The only minor complaint I'd have is that the likes of MSI, Asus, and GeekaWhat could really do with releasing a few more all-white motherboards. Not motherboards with a few white accents. Same with graphics cards, right? Like you can buy white cases, power supplies, coolers. Where's the GPUs and MOBOs, guys? Help us out. Okay, it looks less grey than on the photos, which I'm pleased about. I prefer white components rather than grey ones. Oh, yes. Yes, I like that. We've got some nice rubber dampers on the fans. The fan generally does feel a bit cheap, but the cooler is a pretty affordable bet. So as long as they do a decent job of staying quiet and keeping a processor cool, I can sort of live with that. 240mm radiator. Oh, MSI, you beauties. I love the silver logo as well. That's a really, really nice accent. With these coolers, of course, as well, you have got the pump integrated with the radiator. So before someone screams at me that the radiator's in the wrong place and my radiator is going to get bubbles and the whole thing's going to explode. No, it's not. The pump is actually in the rad. You've got no problems in terms of the orientation. You can basically mount this thing however the hell you like, which is good news. In terms of prep work, there really isn't too much other than this bag. Now this bag here says LGA 1700, which basically means it's the bag that we want. Rather than installing the motherboard and then trying to go through all the cooler steps, I think it will be easier to do that now. Take the included LGA 1700 backplate, stick this to the rear of the motherboard using the 3M pads to stop it going anywhere, and then add these screws in for good measure. We'll deal with the rest of this process a little bit later, but this prep for now will just save us a little bit of hassle. What we're able to do next then is move our motherboard assembly gently to one side and pick out the case for this build, which also happens to have our white themed power supply on, the MSI MPG Gunyear 110R White Edition. Now MSI have obviously got this thing going on for white PC components at the moment. Maybe they'll do like a blue one and a green one, maybe I'm dreaming. And although this thing is not opened, or not sealed I should say, I haven't actually seen it myself yet. So let's see. Oh yes. Look at that. That looks good. I'm not being funny. That looks awesome. MSI, I mean, you could do with a little bit more mesh on the front, but I'm gonna like let it slide on this one occasion because the case otherwise looks completely sick. Now, one thing that we are gonna do with this case, and we might need to grab a screwdriver for, is we're gonna remove all of the side panels. Removing the side panels obviously allows you to get into the case in the first place, which is pretty important, quite fundamental really, but it also allows easy access by removing both panels to everything in the case. You could leave this rear panel on, but it will make your whole build process a little bit more tricky, and you're gonna have to take it off later for cables and wiring, so you might as well just go ahead and do it now while it's nice and easy. Repeat for the front panels. These screws seem to be a little bit less tight, which is nice. And store your tempered glass panels somewhere safe where you're not going to lose them, stand on them, tread on them, or cut your feet on them, because nobody wants that, and that's not going to be a good feeling at the end of your build process. Now, there is one thing we do need to do before going all gung-ho and screwing the motherboard in. Because this is technically an ATX case, although it is quite a small full-size ATX tower, some of our standoffs, these are the silver posts that hold our motherboard into place, may be in the wrong positions. Not only is this bad because it leaves your motherboard without the appropriate support, but it's also bad because it can ground out your motherboard by making contact in places where your board simply hasn't got holes. If we take a look at the motherboard, this is where the holes should be on the board, and this is where the standoff should correspond, and our top 3 and middle 3 both look to be in the right places. Head down the motherboard and we're missing a couple here with some extra ones at the bottom we don't need. Adding a standoff here and here on the 2 holes marked M, and then we can go ahead and screw the motherboard in. It's got a built-in rear I/O shield, meaning you haven't got to worry about that step, and the whole thing is starting to come together and look pretty sick. I'm really excited for how this build is going to turn out, and because the case is quite small, I don't think our M-ATX board looks particularly lost either. Once the motherboard's in, we can then go ahead and finish the cooler. I'm going to slide the case to one side, as there is a little bit more prep we actually need to do to the CPU water block itself. There's no shame at this stage of the build to actually go ahead and grab your CPU cooler's manual and figure out how the hell you're supposed to install it, because it does differ on a cooler by cooler basis, and you can never be, fully sure that you're necessarily getting it right all the time. So let's go ahead and check what is going on. So by the looks of things, what you need to do is grab this bracket with a sort of a hole in the end, and then we actually need to pop that over our cooler. So I think we do it a little something like this. It can be a bit fiddly, but I think it should be pretty symmetrical, so it doesn't matter which way it goes on. There we are. And then we're going to pop that straight over our posts around the CPU. We'll be fastening it down with these sort of, I want to say, tensioned screws. Although one thing that has made me laugh is the included tube of thermal paste. It's like 10% full. Now, to be fair, it's probably enough for what we need. But come on, MSI, you could have given me the whole tube. Guys, come on. That's probably not enough if you get it wrong, or you change your cooler later, or you drop it on the floor and some comes out. It's a bit disappointing, because the cooler's really cool, but definitely scrimping on the thermal paste. I don't know what that's all about. This is shaping up to look pretty good. The radiator's in, the RGB fans are in, they all match. The only thing I kind of wish is that these were white screws, but, beggars can't be choosers. Now, I talked in detail earlier about our GPU, and I'll be looking at the performance metrics you can achieve from it very shortly too, so keep your eyes peeled for those benchmarks. For now, we're going to go ahead and pop it in the case. I think it's going to fit, although I'm becoming increasingly worried that I may have bitten off slightly more than I can chew. There's only one way to really find out. Oh, easy. That's going to fit easy peasy. As I say, it's a bit of a shame it's not white, but it still looks awesome. As far as which 3060 Ti to go for, MSI also have a Ventus design, which is going to cost you slightly less money. Basically, whatever card is on the best sale right now is what I'd recommend. And there are a lot of GPU deals to be had at this moment. We made a video on it recently, which you can check out in the card section now, breaking down the good, the bad, and the ugly as far as GPU deals go here in the here in the UK, over in the US, Canada, and all that good stuff. What we need to do is we need to remove our top 2 PCI lanes from the rear of our case. So we can do that by taking out this screw first of all, this screw second of all, and what that's going to do is remove our protective PCI lane cover, and then we can take off the rear 2 a little something like so. We'll be putting the metal piece we just removed back on once the graphics card is in to hide away our pesky and ugly PCI lanes at the rear. Repeat this for both of your PCI lanes. Big graphics cards may have a third that you need to remove. For us today, it's just the 2. Push back the retention clip on your PCI slot, slide the graphics card carefully in, and apply a bit of pressure, and you should hear a very quiet, satisfying click sound. Add in the 2 screws we just removed, then pop on our cover, and we can round things off by installing the power supply last of all. The last of all these parts then is the power supply. Now this is MSI's A750F 750 watt white edition unit. Now I'm not sure whether the cables are also white or whether they've scrimped out and gone for black units. Only time and opening this box will tell. Here we go. Oh, the cables are in a bag. I've got to wait a bit longer to find out. Come on, MSI. What colour cables have they gone for? White! Yes! Because I was about to be a bit moany there, because I've seen people bring out white power supplies with black cables, and it just doesn't make any sense. Why would I want to have a white theme and then ruin it by... You get the point. There's no point unless the cables are also white. We're going to take the power supply out of the box as well. Lovely powder-coated finish. Nice accents, bit of silver here and there as well, just to really polish things off. Oh, yes. Look at That's beautiful. Just be mindful that you're not actually going to need all of these cables, but MSI include all the ones you may possibly need for now and future upgrades later down the line. The ones that we will be using include our 24-pin motherboard power cable, that's this one right here, a dual 6+2-pin PCIe power cable, now that's going to power up the two 8-pin connections on our RTX 3060 Ti. You can see there's two 6 pins and the little extra 2 pins too, plus also a CPU power connection for good measure. That includes this one here, so it's 4+4 pins, 8 pins in total for the processor. And then finally, to wrap things up, we're also going to throw in a SATA power cable. You'd use this typically for any of your SATA hard drives or SSDs. Of course, we've not got any unless you had a hard drive in, but it will power up our RGB hub as well. That means all of these cables, in fact more than half the cables, we're not going to need for this build. So if you're chucking them away, well, don't throw them in the bin, but if you're chucking them back in the bag and saving them for safekeeping, you haven't got anything to worry about. Just make sure your CPU, GPU and motherboard have power and any RGB hubs for good measure. You then want to run your motherboard cable to the right hand side of the board, your graphics card cable to the GPU and the CPU cable to the top left of the motherboard, and then the build portion of the video is basically done. All we need to do now is check out the performance of this system by testing it out in a wide variety of titles, and that's exactly what we've done. At 1440p high across the board, we tested games like Valorant, Apex Legends and the new Formula 1 title. Let's start off by looking at Apex in a bit more detail. 1440p high settings, we managed to pull in just shy of 130 frames per second on average, with 129 FPS to be precise. All of our frame rate data was gathered with both MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner and Nvidia FrameView. The good results carried on through into Battlefield 2042, the next game on our list and one of the biggest AAA titles out right now. This game gives a good indication of what you should expect from a brand new title on this system, and 104 frames per second on average was not a bad result. Wherever DLSS was available, we did try to utilize it too, to ensure we're taking advantage of our 3060 Ti's powerful RT cores. Moving on through to Formula 1 2022, I'm a massive F1 fanboy, so to pull in 141 frames per second on average here satisfied me greatly. The game looks awesome and it does have a benchmark mode, so if you want to pause at our settings, copy these for yourself, you can see how your laptop or existing build stacks up against this powerful PC. The good results were once again prevalent in our next title, Spiderman Remastered. I'm also a big Spiderman fan. These games are tickling my fancy very well today, with 113 FPS on average here. Once again, we did use DLSS with a tiny bit of ray tracing into the mix as well. Spider-Man looks awesome, and it's something just a bit different than your average first-person shooter. Moving on through to Valorant, this is a game where frame rate is certainly not going to be a problem. 454 frames per second, not a problem to be precise. 90 and 99th percentile results were solid. The closer these two numbers are to our average, the more consistently high our frame rate was overall. Finally, to wrap things up, we tested out Fortnite, but this time at 1080p competitive settings. Everything tuned down to low except the render distance, which we set to far. 196 frames per second on average to be precise, with strong 90 and 99th percentiles too. Oh, and a nice victory royale as the cherry on our proverbial PC cake. With that, that wraps it up for the benchmarks and the build. If you'd like to learn more, check out the links down below. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.